I appreciate the opportunity to come and talk a little bit about what Weber Basin has been doing with our drought contingency plan that we've been working on over the last year and a half or so. First of all, just for those that may not be familiar with where Weber Basin is located, we're in northern Utah, just north of Salt Lake City. And so Weber and Davis counties are the two counties on the Wasatch Front that we service. And then we service Morgan and Summit counties as well, and then a little bit of Box Elder County, just the south end. So that gives you an idea of our service area. We do have a lot of upstream reservoirs where we store a lot of our water, starting with Smith and Morehouse, kind of the north slope of the Uintas. And then we move down Rockport Reservoir. Echo is a large reservoir that is not our reservoir, but we do own a lot of shares in Echo. But that was previous to our project. And then East Canyon also feeds the Weber. Lost Creek Reservoir is our reservoir. And then on the Ogden, you've got Causey and Pineview. And so those are the large reservoirs where we're storing a lot of our upstream storage. And then on the very bottom end, we have Willard Bay, and that's kind of the big bathtub at the bottom where we can catch anything that we release or that later in the season we can pump up from Willard Bay and fulfill a lot of demands along the Wasatch Front in Weber and Davis counties. So it's nice to have an off-stream reservoir down below where we can catch everything that we need to. And so it's a great system that was developed by the feds years ago. And it's some challenges at times, obviously, managing that system. One of the challenges that we first had was the poor winter of 12 and 13. That kind of started this second drought, that we were in from 12 to 16. We only stored about 16,000 acre feet in our upstream reservoirs. Our total water contracts that we have to deliver are 225,000. So you can see we got really nervous when we only store that much water upstream. And so we also have 90,000 acre feet of M&I contracts that we have to deliver. And Weber Basin, since we came a little late to the scene, we were established in 1950. And so there was already a lot of companies around at that time. So we are a junior water right holder on the system. But then in 2013, 14, and 15, we had to implement restrictions, watering restrictions in our area because of the drought. And that's just a photo of Pineview Reservoir on the Ogden River as it was a little low during that drought period. So that's why we got nervous in 12 and 13 and felt like we needed to understand a little bit more about drought and how that's going to impact both the district as well as our customers into the future. So as far as the drought contingency plan that we're working on, it was a grant that we originally received from the Bureau of Reclamation to help us with this. It was a 50% funding from the BOR. And then as part of our grant, we put together a project team that we felt like would really help us achieve our objectives with this plan. And so we hired a consultant to help us, JUB, but then we also felt like we needed a lot of expertise from different universities and learning institutions. So Utah State was a university that we hired. And then Water Resources helped us a lot on the modeling effort that was done in the Riverware model. And so we really appreciate Water Resources and all their work that they did to help us. And then Western Water Assessment, Seth and his group really did a lot as far as future climate scenarios and looking at the different scenarios. And so I'll go over that as well. But as far as our team, we felt like we had just a great team that we were able to assemble to help us with this plan. That's kind of our task force and advisory group members. A lot of this drought planning that we did was a large collaborative effort, and we tried to involve as many individuals as we could and kind of reach across. And a lot of these individuals, well, some are some of our customers that we deliver water to, and then others, as you can see, are a lot of state agencies. They're involved a lot in drought planning. And so that just gives you an idea of who we worked with, who was on our task force, and who was our part of our advisory group. And they were paramount in giving us the information that we needed, and just to understand kind of what they did on a regular basis, and to understand some of their issues and problems that each of them faced as well during a drought scenario. And then that's just a photo of one of our group meetings that we had. So you're really not supposed to be able to read this. This is just giving you an idea, kind of our drought history from 1971 to 2017. And it just shows you, and I'll zoom into a few of those areas here, but it just kind of shows you from 1970, which is really kind of when we've been kind of recording this history, and gives you an idea of some of the droughts that we've experienced. One of which was the drought of 1977. That was a really low year. You can see how things dipped in that 77, 78 year. In fact, we had this photo, this old photo that we found. We are not watering this lawn this year, and these shrubs this year, 1977, because of the water shortage. So sometimes, I mean, it can be such a drastic, low snowpack year like in 77. It really just took 1 year to really drop the bottom out. And so in 1977, we stopped all watering of our grass there at the facility. And then you can see, this shows the drought from 01 to 04, as well as the drought from 12 to 15, and shows the low storage that we had during that time period. As we were going through some of the meeting minutes back in the day, back in 1961, we found this Manager Felstead. He was the manager of Weber Basin Water at the time. And as they were going around, from 60 to 63 was another pretty significant drought period in Utah. In fact, I was looking at, some of the records of the Great Salt Lake, and that was the last time the Great Salt Lake was at its very low, was in 61. So it's just interesting that that's when, Weber Basin was having a lot of the issues. But the manager said they've been getting excellent cooperation from the cities and towns. Talked about Sunset and Ogden City cooperating. They seemed to be agreeable to our plan that they start pumping, and we would pay them $8 per acre foot for every drop they save. $8 per acre foot, not too bad, huh? But the thing is, he says, we have contacted no one who has not been willing to cooperate with us during the drought period. And so we think that that is significant, and we know that individuals come together during a drought scenario, to help out one another as we need to, and we're sure that will happen in the future, and has happened as we've had droughts in the past. But we just thought that was interesting. So as far as the vulnerability assessment that was conducted, we originally looked at the reconstruction from tree rings that both BYU and Utah State has worked on, and back to 1429 as they've looked at those records. Then USU was able to downscale annual flows to monthly flows for us, and be able to provide monthly flows throughout this period. And that was the part that they really helped us with. Then, as I mentioned, Western Water Assessment provided projections for us from the hydrology for different climate change scenarios that we looked at. And then Water Resources used that Riverware model to simulate the performance of how our current infrastructure would operate during all these different drought scenarios that we ran through. And so that's how we looked at our vulnerability assessment. Now this shows the Paleo model results. I'm sure you guys remember the drought from 1630 to 1639. That was a real dry period for us. But you can see how dry that was back then. And then we have the Dust Bowl of the 1930s that was very dry. And then I mentioned that 60 to 62 drought, which was the previous historic low for the Great Salt Lake. And And then we've got the 2013 to 2015. So each of those blue dots on that graph just shows the total storage at the June 1st time frame. So that's the June 1st storage. And obviously those are simulated back in the history of the Paleo record that we're looking at there. But it kind of gives you an idea of, how bad things were in the 1630s. So, and then frankly, once we looked at that data and saw that, we did get concerned that those have happened in the past, and feel like, these drought periods that we've had have been 3 to 4 years, it seems like, at the longest. And then we have a really wet year, like 2011, that really helped. 2017 really helped. But like the 1630s, that was a 7-8 year drought that we definitely could have in the future. And if we did, we'd be very concerned about our water supplies, particularly when we're only storing 15,000 acre feet potentially during those years. And so these different response action levels, you can see the yellow, orange, and red. You can see in the more recent history, from 1970 or so, we've only been in the yellow. We haven't had any events in the orange or the red. Orange was 1960s. The Dust Bowl would have been a red event, so that would have been an extreme red event. And then 1630s, it just gives you an idea of where we'd be there. So as we establish these response action levels, those are going to be really helpful for us in the future. Then these are the climate change scenarios that Western Water Assessment helped us with. You can see the warm, wet, warm, dry, hot, wet, and hot, dry scenarios. Obviously, the hot, dry is the worst future scenario that is possible. But you can see in all those scenarios, the peak moves to May from June in all of those different scenarios. And so, those are likely future climate change scenarios that could occur. And if they do, and the solid line there shows the 1980 to 2010, shows the average that we're seeing. And then you can see that the climate change scenarios shift all of those back a month. And the runoff will come off earlier. In some cases, in some of those wet scenarios, it's actually a higher runoff. But it's just really hard to know what the future is going to bring as far as those different scenarios. But we feel like that we kind of have to plan for the worst. I'm an engineer. We always look at worst case scenarios. And so we have to plan for that hot, dry, worst case scenario. This shows the different response action levels again, but it adds that projected in the future scenarios. And you can see, from basically 2030 to 2060, it looks like there's 5 red events that occur in that future scenarios if we're looking at that hot, dry situation. There's probably 3 orange level events in there as well. And so we think that this is the worst case scenario that we would see. But if we do approach anywhere near the orange or the red, that will be levels that we've never seen before and cuts that will be necessary that we've never had to do, in the last 40 years of the district. And so that's going to be something that we have to be prepared for. And frankly, have to prepare our customer agencies, for something like that. Because that potential is there, that could happen. So mitigation actions are actions that can be taken prior to a drought and help lessen the impacts of a drought. And so as we've looked at our drought plan, and as a lot of things have we're essentially at the final stages now of this plan. We're starting we basically have a final draft in place now that we're reviewing. And as we've gone through this process, we've got several mitigation actions that have come to the surface. And I would just like to review those that we can do prior to the drought. The first of which is short-term transfer agreements. that's where we can create a program and get contracts in place to compensate large ag users for fallowing their ground or for not planting their ground in a given year. We recently met with several farmers in the areas, and we've asked them, what their thoughts are about some sort of short-term agreement. And Colorado has done a lot, California has done a lot in terms of these different agreements. And it really depends on what the farmer is doing. What is he raising? Is it a cash crop? Is it hay? Really depends on their farming and what they're trying to do. I mean, if they're doing onions, cash crop, corn, they're really not going to be excited to fallow any ground because of the payoff, obviously, for them. And so, but if it was maybe a third cutting of hay, that they had to forego, they were much more open to something like that. But it'd be very difficult even for the first and second cutting, they said, for us. They said that, we definitely want to see grasses go brown in the city before you ask farmers to cut back on their water use. And they made that very explicit that, before you come to us for these fallowing agreements, we want to see grasses go brown in the city. And so, it was interesting to get their take on this, and that they feel like, I think sometimes they feel like we go to them first to say, hey, we need you to cut back. And they said, the 20% cuts that Weber Basin has historically done hasn't hurt them that bad. I mean, they've been able to manage with a 20% less. But if you go into the 40% range and you really try to cut us back further, that's really going to impact what we can do as farmers. And, they all stress to us, hey, farming is just kind of a hobby here. We don't make much money doing this. And water is our lifeblood. So you got to be very careful. We want to see those grasses in the cities go brown if you're going to ask us to cut back. And so that's just something that we have to be mindful of and realize that that's the expectation from the farmers as we've gone out and talked to them. Also, there's an internet water supply dashboard that we want to create. We want to make it easier for both all those that are working in the industry as well as the general public to understand, where we're at in terms of our drought status, groundwater supplies, where's the runoff at, where's the snowpack at, what's our projected June 1st storage. We recently received a grant to be able to basically create this dashboard that would enable us to put all this information in one central location and make it much easier for both our operators that are operating the system as well as the general public to understand exactly where we're at in terms of our future water supplies. And so we feel like it's important to educate the public on where things are at. Also, our secondary water metering project that we're working on is also paramount. We are saving about 35% by educating the consumer on how much water they're using. And we've got about 7,000 meters installed now of our about 18,000 retail connections. So we're making good progress there, but there's a lot of work left to be done. I know our legislature is considering potentially mandating that metering of secondary water systems take place. And so I know we're working through some of those issues right now with the legislature and trying to help them. So that's just a picture of one of our new meters installed on the secondary water system. And then continue our meetings with Division of Wildlife Resources, Trout Unlimited, and other habitat stakeholders. As we've been able to work with those different agencies and work on projects that benefit, the habitat and the fisheries. This was one that we did in conjunction with Wildlife Resources and Trout Unlimited to help these cutthroat trout and return to their spawning areas. This was just below a culvert that we have on the Gateway Canal up in Morgan County, and we just helped reconstruct that stream bed so that the trout could actually get up and get through that culvert. Before this, it was impossible for them to get up through there and return to those spawning areas. And so that was a good project that we worked on with them. And then another one is the drought surcharge fees. As we look to, right now we're looking at billing for the secondary water that goes through the meter. We're working on a study right now, and we feel like if we're in a significant drought, then we need to have a different rate structure that would be applied for outdoor watering. It would be a lot more significant and penalize folks a lot more for excessive use outside. And so these would be drought surcharge fees that would be applied on the secondary water systems. So that's a process. We're not going to get there tomorrow, but it is something that we really want to do, is help people understand how important it is that we start with new construction, probably start billing for the water that runs through that meter on new construction. And eventually, we'd probably start charging other individuals as well for that secondary water. And that just shows the different, tiered rate structures that, are possible. That just shows a couple of cities in our area. So response action is a planned action taken after a trigger event occurs. And so after the drought has begun, response actions are things that we can do to manage the impact of that drought. And this just shows this shows basically what our stakeholders felt like we could do as far as demand reduction targets on our system. So if we get into, first of all, that gray area, which is essentially where we are at today, is kind of an advisory level. We had such a low, snowpack this last year. We're kind of an advisory level right now. Reduced demands through messaging and general water conservation. If we get into the yellow, that's where we were at in 12 through 15. That's a moderate. So that's a 20% reduction both on secondary water, ag, and then culinary water outdoor. So we could potentially save about 43,000 acre feet as we do those cuts. If we go into a 4 response level in orange, our stakeholders felt like we could do a 60% reduction on secondary water, municipal water outside, 40% on ag, again 60 on M&I water that goes outdoors, and then a 10% cut on the M&I water indoors. That would save about 120,000 acre feet. And then if we get to the extreme level, heaven forbid, 5, 95% on secondary water, 70% on ag, 95 again on M&I water outdoors, and then a 25% cut on outdoors, and then a 25% cut on M&I water indoors. So that would save upwards of 200,000 acre feet if we went to that level. And hopefully, we never have to get to that point. But I think that 5% on secondary water and the M&I outdoor was just to kind of keep trees and shrubs alive through that period. And so that's kind of the results of the different meetings that we've had with our different stakeholders. And they felt like, and that's meeting with, our fisheries group, our ag group, and then all of our secondary water providers as well. And this was kind of the compilation of where they felt like we could potentially cut during extreme drought events. So just kind of gives you an idea of where they felt like we could go. So in summary, we know that there's been multiple severe and extreme droughts that have occurred in the last 400 years, and we just need to be prepared and ready for those. Climate change will have a significant impact on our future water supply, and we need to be ready for that as well. Different mitigation actions that can be performed to improve our drought resiliency. I talked about several of those, kind of the top 5 that we came up with. And then just improve our communication and cooperation with water users. I think one of the big things that this plan did for us was to just help us kind of reach across the aisle to all these different agencies and individuals that are part of, the water supply that we have. And it just helped us, improve our relationships with a lot of these individuals and companies that we work with. And I think that was really beneficial and helpful, that folks understand, hey, we're just trying to work and improve the situation and have more information available to us during a drought situation, and try to get on the same team and not, kind of work in our silos so much as we've historically done a little bit. And so I think that's been a huge benefit from, working through this plan. So I think that's my last slide. So anyway, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.